athletes are having less time to train. They're having to travel further afield to train. They're taking more risks for training. And we've seen more fatalities in this sport that I love over the last year.
The Winter Olympics depend on one thing that's becoming rarer each year: wintry weather.
In many parts of the world, there's less reliable snow because of climate change.
So what happens to the Winter Olympics if the snow disappears?
That's our climate question. From the BBC World Service, I'm Jordan Dunbar.
And I'm Greer Jackson.
Let's welcome former Olympian and British alpine skier, as well as presenter of the BBC Ski Sunday programme, Shemi Alcott. Shemi, thanks for joining us.
Hello team, how are we?
Very well.
Very well. Wish I was where you are. That backdrop, the snow, the mountains, looks gorgeous. Can I ask?
I'm definitely living the dream and I'm full of gratitude for that.
You started skiing from a very young age. I think I read your first race was at the age of 3. Is that right?
Now, I thought I won that race, and I've been telling people for about 30 years that I won that race because I got a teddy with a gold medal. And then finally, about 10 years ago, my father said to me, "You've got to stop lying about that first race victory." I was like, "What do you mean? You know, I was a prodigy. I must have been amazing. I won a, gold medal." And he said, "Everyone under the age of 5 won a gold medal." And I said, "Oh, but come on, I must have been fast." And he said, "You stopped to give me, your dad, who was videoing you, a kiss on the way down."
Oh, that's so cute.
That's
I was like, "Well, this is the first and last time I ever did that."
So what speeds did you get up to in your peak?
The fastest I ever got clocked at was 92 miles an hour. And my husband in Wengen World Cup got clocked at 99.9 miles an hour. So I think his frustration is more real because he didn't make 100 miles an hour.
Still, that's terrifyingly fast.
Yeah.
You don't know you're going that quickly. I think anything over 60 miles an hour is generally just a fast speed. We don't look to the side and go, "Gosh, those trees are moving really rapidly." You're just in this hyper focus zone where speed is irrelevant. You're just really staying in the present.
The view behind you of Kitzbühel in Austria, is that what it normally looks like in January?
No, it definitely doesn't normally look like this. I did this on purpose, actually. I'm trying to be realistic of what we're seeing in the mountains, and I could have done it downstairs with this oil painting of a beautiful mountain, but this is the reality. You look to south-facing mountains and slopes, and they are green. And you're seeing, we've got strips of white up here that are super slick, super icy. You see tourists not enjoying it so much. So it affects everybody.
So you've been skiing for a long time. You've been skiing around the world. Do you remember, Shemi, the first time that you started to notice conditions changing, as in they weren't what you thought they should have been at that time of year?
I am quite embarrassed to say that throughout my whole career of 4 Olympics, I didn't really look up. Like I literally flew around the world. I unpacked. I had a designated race arena with this slope in front of me that I just focused on being the best I could be. And then that kind of circle repeated itself. I just traveled. And then when I retired, I had the opportunity. I took my husband for his 30th to go and ski the Vallée Blanche. Now, the Vallée Blanche is the most iconic off-piste run above Chamonix in France. And it is, you are in amongst nature. There's no piste there. There's a lift that you take up, and then you get roped in and you walk down and you're skiing in the glacier. Now, I first skied that run in 1992 when I was 10 years old, and it was a monumental memory for me. Still is now. I can remember that run. I can close my eyes. I can visualize it. It was one of the reasons that I wanted to make my life in the mountains. It was such an impactful run in 1992. And I thought about that run the whole of my career and how that is what real skiing is, completely at one with nature. Now, when we went back there 25 years later, I remember getting off the lift and I'm like, "Oh, I know exactly what is about to present itself to me. I've been here, I've done this." And I looked out and it was just such a stark contrast to what I had visually remembered. And it wasn't the run. It had massively changed. It visually wasn't the same. It didn't feel the same. It had lost over 100 meters of volume from the bottom of that glacier. So that's more than the height of Big Ben. For me, once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. And this is almost 10 years ago now. And I feel like now I have front row seat tickets to the effects of global warming and climate change. And it's something that I'm really passionate to tell my story. I'm far from perfect. I really believe that the narrative around sustainability can't be perfect because none of us will try anything, but actually just having that purpose and being able to talk about what I'm seeing. So I'm a mum now. I've got kids, they're 9 and 7. They absolutely love this sport. I'd say my biggest success isn't anything I achieved in skiing, but is the fact that my children love to ski and we can live this passion all together as a family. But my eldest wants to be an Olympian. He wants to be a ski racer. And I am so torn now because I don't know if that will be a possibility for him in 15 years. But who am I to shut his dreams down, to go, actually, I know I've given you all of this amazing life in the mountains, but I don't know if those mountains will still be able to support your dreams when you're old enough. So it's a very challenging time from a personal level. And I know I'm talking about purely this luxury, top end level of impact here, but the next generation might never be able to ski the Vallée Blanche. It might not still be there.
I just wonder, as an Olympian, a former Olympian, how less snow, shorter seasons, less time to train, all of that is impacting the Olympians you're going to be seeing on the slopes.
I mean, huge. You kind of brushed upon it there. If we start talking about the fact that we used to be able to train all year round, I grew up training on the glaciers, so I didn't have to travel down to the Southern Hemisphere. I did go down there later on in my career, but I had the glaciers in Europe. Those glaciers now are not all year round ski destinations. We are seeing the retreat of them at a drastic rate, and that doesn't just implicate racers, it's the whole economy that make their living from that infrastructure that's set up. And it means that athletes are having less time to train. They're having to travel further afield to train. They're taking more risks for training. And we've seen more fatalities in this sport that I love over the last year. The other reason it's getting more dangerous is that the snow that's there is often completely injected. We used to be able to ski on hard, cold snow, and now this snow has got hosed on the top of it. So it's made to be pure vertical ice walls, which makes it fairer for a competition. The snow conditions stay more consistent for the later runners. But it means that the edges that the servicemen do have to be so razor sharp, to the extent that it has now been mandatory to wear anti-cut thermals to be a ski racer now, because when they fall now, the skis are so sharp, they're cutting through all the layers of clothing. And so it's chainmail that they're having to wear. So these are small implications, but are there because of the changing temperatures that we're seeing, the lack of consistency in the mountains. I mean, that's at an elite level. At a fundamental tourism level, there are 2 to 3 resorts that are closing around the world every single year. In France, you've had 186 resorts close. And what that does is it means that those higher resorts are becoming massively congested. And so the injuries up there are getting higher as well.
And in the athletes and the sports itself, are people then talking about climate change much more because of this training season, the added expense and so on? Is it coming up a lot more?
Yeah, I mean, the 23-24 season, there were 21 races at World Cup level cancelled.
Wow.
So this is a massive chunk of this tour, this world tour. And that's when people started speaking up. That's when FIS actually employed a head of sustainability for the first time to look at it.
What's FIS?
The Federation of International Skiing. So they run all the elite level races. I mean, the tour is still dotting across the Atlantic a few times, and there's far too much travel. But they have adjusted some of the calendars, and they're having to do that. There are a few years they wanted to have the pre-season races in Zermatt on the glacier, and there was a lot of chat. That was when you saw those quite horrific images of bulldozers in the glacier moving the snow, really getting involved with nature. And I think a lot of the athletes realize that we have to coexist with this environment that we love and we need. They're starting to speak up.
I mean, given everything we've discussed, the huge and varying impacts on the sport and people who just like to, ski or snowboard, what do you think the future of winter sports is?
I think it's going to be a skeletal program of what we have now. I think there are going to be few and far resorts that can host this. You're going to look at super high altitude resorts. The cost is going to be high because these resorts will be minimal, and they've got to choose whether at Christmas period they put on an elite level event that will take up a lot of their infrastructure, or they open up to more tourists. So there will be this big weighing up of who's more important, and it's variable. Sometimes the snow comes, but it's really inconsistent. Recently, last week, we had loads and loads of powder, but there was no base because we're not having the consistent development of layers of snow, and that means that we get more avalanches and tourist fatalities as well. So it's a very volatile environment.
Shemi, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
What I was really surprised to hear Shemi describe was the number of injuries going up because of those icier conditions, because of the artificial snow. I really had no idea that was happening.
No, me neither. To understand what's happening and what the future might be like, let's meet our next guest, Professor Daniel Scott.
Yeah, Daniel's a researcher at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and he's a leading expert on climate change and winter sports.
Hi, Daniel. How's it going?
Great. How are you doing this morning?
Very well. Thanks very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Daniel, your research has been looking into the viability of winter sports in different locations, i.e. the places that will still be able to host, like the Winter Olympics and professional skiing tournaments and so on. What is it showing?
Yeah, so what we did is we looked at the past hosts, and of those 21 by mid-century, depending if you're in a low or high emission scenario, there was only 12 to 14 left that were climate reliable, so that could help host the snow sports 90% of the time. And that got the attention of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. So they asked us to give a presentation to their future host committee. And then they came back to us and said, well, we've got 93 locations in the world that have most of the winter sports infrastructure already in place. So these are potential hosts as well as past hosts. Can you look at all of those for us? And so we did that. That's some of the new work that we put out. Again, by mid-century of those 93, you're down to about 45 to 55 that can host the Olympics. But the more disconcerting part of that is the Paralympics that happens in March, so about a couple of weeks after the Olympics conclude. Only 17 to 31 are still climate reliable. So that's something that our newest work, we really tried to focus on. How do you solve that higher climate risk for the Paralympics?
And how do you solve that?
Well, there's been talk, and there's pros and cons of merging the Paralympics in with the Olympics and just calling them Olympians. And from a sport equity perspective, that makes complete sense. And there's some that sort of push back and say, well, the Paralympics should have its own showcase a little bit outside of the Olympics, and that's fair. But from a logistics perspective, the Winter Olympics is already too big for former hosts like a Lillehammer or an Innsbruck. They're just too small to continue to host the games. So if you combine in the Paralympics, you almost double the sports program, and you can't fit that into a 16-day program. So then we looked at, well, what if you shifted the Olympics forward by about 3 weeks? So it would start mid-January, finish up, start of February. That would allow the Paralympics to start the last week of February, run into the first week of March. And that made a huge difference for the Paralympics. It almost doubled the number of climate reliable locations.
And the moving in time is because March is getting warmer, you're heading into spring, so you want to come forward because it's colder, right?
Exactly. So February climatically in the Northern Hemisphere is the best month to hold any type of winter sport, whether it's the Winter Olympics, Paralympics, FIS races, etc. But January is typically pretty good too. Some places need a bit more time to get that snowpack ready for the Christmas, New Year holiday, but usually by mid-January they've had a sufficient time to do that.
I was describing to Jordan earlier on in the show about how much less snow I've been seeing when I go skiing in the French Alps. But I wonder, is that the picture everywhere, or is it different depending on where you are?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's place specific across the Northern Hemisphere, but that is the broader trend. So we've really seen in the last 20 years, but in particular the last decade, lower elevation mountain areas across the Northern Hemisphere are warming at about double the rate of global warming. And then that's obviously affecting the snowpack. Less extent, not as long for the ski season. So particularly shoulder seasons, you're seeing the snow cover disappear. And then that affects your ability to make snow. So some of the resorts that you may have gone to that had snowmaking, they have to wait closer to Christmas and they don't quite get as much snow made in time for some of those key holidays.
What is the difference for these different ski resorts? Is it like height? You mentioned where you are. Can you explain
Yeah.
how this is changing in the different
Yeah,
resorts?
absolutely. So altitude plays a big role in it in mountain environments, but latitude, if you think of North America, the Canadian Rockies versus the south end of the Rockies in the United States, latitude plays into it. And then the other big thing that can influence thing, if you're closer to the coasts, some of the Scandinavian resorts, but the same with Whistler, maybe one that your viewers know in Canada, you get a marine climate influence. In California, you've seen atmospheric rivers lately. It can bring you, buckets and buckets of snow, but it can also bring lots of rain. So even if you've had a snowpack or you've made a snowpack, it can melt that as well. So that marine climate influence can be a detriment to ski areas as well.
I see. And you said that's the trend in the northern hemisphere, but what about the southern hemisphere?
Similar, but there's just not the same type of snow sports infrastructure. Australians do have a ski industry, a little bit in New Zealand as well. The Australian ski industry is actually one of the more vulnerable ones that we've analyzed around the world, in part because all their ski areas are relatively at the same elevation and very close together. Most other markets we've looked at through North America, Scandinavia, European Alps, China, there's really winners and losers. What you're going to see is some ski areas will go out of business eventually, but the others will be there to pick up market share. So Australia is one of the few that don't have any winners left. The Australians will have to go to New Zealand or elsewhere, Japan, etc., to ski in the longer term.
And unfortunately for winter sports, Winter Olympics, some of the most popular venues and resorts are in those areas losing snow. And one of the things they could do is make fake snow. Daniel, how do you make fake snow?
Well, it's not fake. Hollywood makes fake snow. So the
Okay.
snow making or machine made snow, as we would call it, once it's made, you and I can pick it up, put it in our drink and eat it just like you would a snow cone. So it's real snow. It's just water, sprayed up in under high pressure, cold enough temperatures, enough to turn that water into snow. If you've ever seen the pictures of people in their backyards with some hot water in a big jug and they throw it up when it's minus 30 and then instantly it turns into snow, similar process, but at scale.
And what's the problem with that then? It sounds, the way you describe it, is quite simple. Why can't they all do it? What are the drawbacks of it?
There aren't really. I mean, there's people who do question the sustainability of snowmaking, and those are fair questions. The questions are usually associated with water use and energy use that has emissions associated with it. So on the water side, in North America, many of the places that we have purpose-built reservoirs. So you fill that up in spring when there's a lot of water around. You can even use it for flood control. Use that water for snowmaking. You put it up on the hill. Come the next spring, 80–90% of that melts back into the same watershed. So that's at the at the sustainability end of things. But we've also heard instances of California using groundwater for snowmaking. Not so sustainable. So it really runs that spectrum. And then on the energy side, just as a comparison, the next two Olympic Games in France, their grid is entirely nuclear. Some solar and wind mixed into there. So that snowmaking has no carbon footprint or very little. Whereas when they go to Salt Lake City, the next games after that, they still have some coal in their grid. So every unit of snowmaking you make there is going to have 16 times the carbon footprint that you do in France. So it's very space or place specific. And some of the questions were in China, relying on 100% snowmaking. We knew that was going to be the case because winter is their dry season. So Mother Nature was not going to give them a lot of snow. They had to make the snow. That was part of the bid. And snowmaking's been part of the Winter Olympics since Lake Placid, so that's the 1980s. So about 40 years. It's always been there. To what extent you want it, you have to use it. So this year in Cortina, it's there. They're getting some good snow the last few weeks. But they've also had great snowmaking weather, so they'll be making some. So we're not sure what the percentage is, but it's always there as a backup.
I mean, you can make artificial snow, as you described, but you can also farm snow as well, can't you? Which I think is quite a baffling proposition to many people who don't
snow,
ski.
it's real snow farming. It's different.
What,
Yes.
what is snow farming?
Yeah, so and we use that in Canada even for to protect highways. So you put up fences that'll, as the wind blows the snow around, it traps it, it slows down, and it piles up around those fences. So that you can put those across some of the ski runs. But the other thing that you saw probably in the Sochi games, they collected up a bunch of snow at the end of the year, and then they piled it all up. They put it under a tarp, essentially a white tarp, a reflective tarp. And they kept most of that through the summer months, and so that they could take the tarp off and start pulling it out and spreading it around to give them a head start on snow making the following winter.
How much can you store that way? It sounds like you might be able to store a bit, but is it large enough?
Yeah,
amounts?
it's certainly not a solution. You can put it specifically in really key areas. But you really need that snow making and then natural snow for ski runs that are tens of or hundreds of meters long.
I mean, we're talking about adapting the sport here, but where does the mitigation, the reduction of emissions to stop a lot of this thing happening come in?
Yeah, no, that's really important point, and that has sustainability. Or the environment was added as a third pillar to the Olympic mission by the IOC about 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago by now. And so climate mitigation is something that they've paid attention to, and much of their emissions is associated with their travel as an organization that have to go around the world and meet bids and go to these events. So
is that also the spectators as well? Or are they not counting those types of emissions?
So they don't as an organization. So they as an organization are just the IOC's emissions, and then they do have requirements as of 2030 on the host city that they will be contractually obligated to reach. I think they use the term climate responsible now. They used to call it climate positive or emission positive. But basically achieving sort of a net emissions of zero through offsetting. But they don't include, to your point, the spectators that are coming from all over the world. They can't keep track of those in the same way they do athletes, officials, coaches, and things like that.
Daniel, for skiers like me, what does skiing look like in the future? Am I still going to be able to go? Really thinking far ahead here, and I want to ski in 2050. Yeah. Where would I book my holiday?
Yeah, certainly, out of the UK, higher elevation, Switzerland, Italy, Austria are some of your safer bets. But some of them, more renowned, lower elevation ones like a Kitzbühel that is, people want to go and see. Those are going to be the ones at risk. Some of the Scandinavian ski areas have thought, well, if the European Alps is going to, suffer to some extent, is Scandinavia, higher altitude and higher elevation, Sweden a better bet? And it is climatically in terms of snowmaking. But we actually did a survey with UK skiers, and they seem to think that the après ski environment in Scandinavia was not the same as it is in the French Alps.
Après is very important to many British.
It absolutely is. It's part of the experience. So that could be developed. So that's something they would have to work on. And there are other places that actually for the Olympics that we thought could be real reliable hosts that don't have a sort of as renowned ski industry. So Eastern Turkey is one, parts of Poland and places that you wouldn't think of as a ski destination. They actually have the mountains and the climate suitable. So those might be places you go to in the future.
Professor Daniel Scott, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks so much for having me. Enjoy the Olympics.
And thank you for watching. Don't forget you can subscribe to the BBC World Service YouTube channel so you don't miss a thing.
And if you've got a climate question for us to answer, write it in the comments below because we have a listener's question programme coming up.
I'm Greg Jackson.
I'm Jordan Dunbar.
We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.